The year is 2014. You wake up on a sunny August morning to the sounds of a mourning dove cooing its simple but beautiful song. You open up YouTube to watch what will most likely just be 10 to 20 minutes of unedited gameplay from some guy who yells a little too much. Following along with this pattern, you see a video from Markiplier, who, at this point, would have had a little less than 3 million subscribers. This video, however, is very different. He's playing a little-known indie game called Five Nights at Freddy's. Life is perfect. Fast forward 10 years and what the fuck is this shit? Five Nights at Freddy's, for the two of you who aren't aware, is this super niche, really tiny horror series that has a small yet loyal cult following. During its nearly 10-year lifespan, the series has profited somewhere between the range of a metric fuck ton to yet another metric fuck ton. Created by devout Christian Scott Cawthon, who was later cancelled for, get this, being a devout Christian, Five Nights at Freddy's is a franchise that has spanned 10 games, not counting the shitty AR game, something like 33 books, a movie, and an empire full of merch of literally anything FNAF related that you can think of. Now, Five Nights at Freddy's is a series that has held a firm place in my heart for a very long time, despite my more passing interest in it as I've grown older. I'm sure that I'm not the only person who had my first major introduction to the horror genre through the first FNAF game. I had dabbled into a couple of horror movies beforehand, courtesy of my dad, but this was the first series that I had found myself really invested in. And for a little kid with a hyperfixation like myself, this was a pretty good time to be invested in a franchise like this. Scott was turning out games so frequently that you truly didn't have to worry about a prolonged period with no content. And that allowed for the longevity of a franchise comprised almost entirely of pretty simple point-and-click games. Now, because the franchise has existed for so long, it's only natural that nowadays you'll hear whispers of people saying that the franchise is dead. Some people will blame it on the fact that it's too kid-friendly now, some people will blame it on the fact that it's not quite what they want it to be, but personally, I think both of these are kind of wrong, though they definitely have their merits to their arguments. So today, I want to talk a little bit about why FNAF, despite being not as popular as it used to be, isn't quite dead. And if you think it's dead, it's probably not for the reasons that you think it is. We're talking a lot about the end right now, but where better to start than...
I ought to knock your block off, you little freak.
What? In my opinion, FNAF 1 is still easily the scariest game in the franchise, almost a decade after it came out. The atmosphere, the character designs, the very simple yet hard to discover lore.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
It's a game that is still a masterclass in tension in my opinion. I'm not going to yap too much about the sound design in this video, as Scruffy has a really well done video on the topic and they are definitely a lot more qualified on the subject than I am. Although admittedly you aren't really incentivized to explore the cameras later in the game aside from Pirate Cove and the right doorway. Early on, one of the most fun experiences you can have is just from exploring the cameras and seeing the different combinations of animatronics and secrets that they have to offer. I mean, hell, this one screen of Freddy haunted most of my childhood just because I thought it was super fucking freaky. Speaking of the animatronics, FNAF 1 easily has the strongest animatronic design in the series in my opinion. Now, this is an opinion that I have repeated time and time again throughout my horror related videos, but I truly do believe that the biggest part of making something scary is, ironically enough, the subtlety of it. Now yes, you can definitely have a big bombastic monster design that serves as the focal point of your horror series. But at the end of the day, if you try too hard to make something scary, it tips the scales of being scary and completely flips them on their head, to the point where I personally think that it can be a bit much. Keep that in mind though, as that is a point that will come back up later in the video. But that being said, FNAF 1's animatronics are the only animatronics in the series that I can reasonably see both standing on a stage performing in front of children and simultaneously being scary as shit in just the right lighting. Hell, look at these screenshots from the first game and tell me that they aren't a lot more scary than anything from the more recent games. It's not only a mix of the fact that the animatronic design is just very well done, but also that the atmosphere in FNAF 1 is incredible. I mean, all of the noises are very, very simple, but paired with the direction that Scott took the art design for this game, I think it's really well done. It's an incredible balance that Scott managed to achieve on his first attempt at actually making something scary intentionally. So yeah, FNAF 1 is still a really well put together game, especially for the time.
That seems a little bit unreasonable. I don't think you should be in hell for that.
FNAF 2 came along, and I've just got to be completely honest, I'm not really a fan of the toy animatronics designs. The uber polished shiny look just kind of feels too future-y for me. And I know that this may be ironic, seeing as this is a series that is carried by souls containing a secret substance called Remnant, but this is just something that I found weird even as a kid. Especially when you take into consideration that this game is supposed to be a prequel. It's kind of hard for me to just set aside the fact that these are so much more advanced than the ones that we see in FNAF 1. Plus, the art design is just a lot weaker in my opinion for them. I also just don't think the game is scary in the slightest. Now, take that with a grain of salt, as FNAF 2 was the first game that I ever 100%ed, so that may have had influence over whether or not I find the game scary. But I personally feel like the game has lost a lot of its atmosphere in trying to be bigger and better than its predecessor. It sucks too, because I really love the designs of the withered animatronics animatronics, but that alone really just couldn't carry the rest of the character designs for me. Plus, a lot of the ambience is noticeably weaker than the first game. I'm sure you've seen memes with the FNAF 2 ambience in it, and it literally plays constantly, especially on the later nights. It gets super repetitive and honestly just kind of grating to listen to. Plus, the game feels a lot more like it's focused on challenge-oriented gameplay rather than actually trying to immerse you in it, so I don't know, it's not for me. FNAF 3 came along, and I'm just gonna come out and say it. I don't like this game at all. The gameplay is very slow, boring, and just very easy. I distinctly remember playing through all of FNAF 3 in one sitting as a kid and just kinda being disappointed. The gameplay loop of just trying to keep Springtrap in the same 4 rooms the whole time is just really boring. Plus, the choice to include the Phantom animatronics, which can't even kill you and are just more of nuisances, is just something that has always struck me as actually bizarre. Now, as much as I don't really like the gameplay, I am a huge fan of the animatronic designs in this game. The Phantom animatronics all look pretty cool in my humble opinion, and I really like the sound design for the puppet. This series is responsible for giving us the best villain in FNAF, that being Springtrap. Springtrap is such a cool fucking concept for a villain. A murderer being doomed to an eternity of suffering at the hands of the very thing that he used to aid in his heinous crimes is actually just amazing. Scott hit actual gold with this design, even if he just doesn't really understand anatomy very well. It's just a shame that this design of Springtrap was locked pretty much exclusively to this game in Ultimate Custom Night, as his other designs in Security Breach and Pizza Sim are either completely overdesigned and overdone, or just actual genuine hot garbage respectively.
Ready for another exciting day clip? F yes!
Before we continue though, I wanted to thank you all for 4.5k on YouTube. It is a ridiculous milestone that I never thought I'd reach in a million years, and I couldn't be more grateful for it. If you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to like or subscribe, and if you're interested in joining our community and staying updated on when I'm uploading, make sure to join my Discord server in the link in the description below. Anyways, back to the video.
Was that the 7?
Speaking of overdesign though, I want to touch on a pretty big topic for me and probably my hottest take. I don't like the designs of the Nightmare animatronics. Now, hold on for just a second. Before you blindly go dislike the video, hear me out. I think the Nightmare animatronics look very cool and do a pretty effective job of portraying exactly why the main character of FNAF 4 has such a big fear of the animatronics. Hell, FNAF 4 is my favorite FNAF game. That being said though, these designs personally fall into a category that I had merely hinted at before. This, in my opinion, is when horror designs try so hard to be scary that they just aren't scary for me personally. I remember seeing these designs as a kid and thinking about how cool they looked in the teasers, but at the end of the day, that's all they are to me. I can only really compare it to seeing a Transformer or something. Like, yeah, it's a cool robot, but is it really scary? No. The only time I'd argue that they're scary is when you flash your light at them and they retreat at the end of the hallways, and that, in large part, is because of how obscure they are by both the dim lighting and their surroundings. Otherwise, they're really well done designs in my opinion, just not very scary ones. You're absolutely entitled to finding them scary if you do though, it's just my opinion.
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it. Aw, dang it. Aw, dang.
Now, I'm gonna skip through the next couple of games as this is mostly when my interest started waning in the games. I don't really like Sister Location besides that one night with Blur and Funtime Freddy. The designs are just a bit too over-designy for me personally, though I understand the lore reasons for why they look the way they do. That being said though, the game is just kind of not very well done. A lot of the FNAF games encourage replayability, and this is not one of them. You play it once, you already know how it's gonna go. Pizzeria Simulator is a very fun game. I do personally think it's pretty scary, probably second only to FNAF 1, but again, that Springtrap design is actually fucking atrocious. Like, look at the ear bone. That being said though, this game was an incredible send-off to the franchise. Punctuated aptly by Ultimate Custom Night being a representation of William Afton's own personal hell. This is probably where the series should have ended in my humble opinion. Though it's definitely a bit of a convoluted mess, it absolutely would have been a more neatly wrapped package had it just ended here. Unfortunately though, this is roughly when SteelWool Studios became involved.
Hello, I like money.
SteelWool Studios published the VR game FNAF Help Wanted, which is fine. This is definitely the type of franchise that is suited to a VR setting. However, littered throughout the game were a few hints at a much bigger story going on behind the scenes. Whispers of a digital version of William Afton's consciousness taking over people's minds echoed throughout the halls of the game. I remember hearing about this and just thinking, no. They wouldn't upend the perfect ending of the series just for the sake of keeping William Afton around out of convenience, right? Right?
Have you ever seen your pancreas? That's what I thought. Moving on.
We've finally gotten to the point that Reddit has long theorized about, that being the childification of FNAF. It makes sense though, as Scott was, at heart, a Christian kids game developer who had only moved to horror as one last hurrah. As I'm sure you're probably aware, Scott decided to create FNAF 1 after some criticism from his previous game, Chipper & Sons Lumber Co. People had criticized the character design in the game, calling them more robotic looking. Scott essentially took this in stride, making this a more deliberate feature of his next game, with the intention of making FNAF his last game if it wasn't successful. Aside from the Desolate Hope, Scott had never really dabbled into territory that was unfriendly for children. So when FNAF became his biggest work, it was only natural that this was very unnatural territory for Scott. As the years would go on, we would soon see cracks in Scott's attempts at horror, whether it be through FNAF World, the end of night cutscenes in Sister Location, or the simulator portions of Pizza Sim. However, the series wouldn't take a nosedive into being fully kid-friendly until Scott handed off the keys to SteelWool, which leads us to...
Yep, hell is actually real, and Christianity was right all along. Sorry.
Oh.
FNAF Security Breach is a fundamentally flawed game. The only compliment that I can really give to the game is that it is definitely ambitious, although it's absolutely too ambitious for its own good. Even ignoring the ridiculously buggy mess that it was upon launch, it is a game that still feels incredibly rushed despite being delayed 2 times, an amount that would make even Cyberpunk take notice of it. Despite a clean 6 endings, literally only one of them is actually properly animated, with the rest of them being animated in this comic book style that would be cool for maybe like a 15-minute short game. But if you're pouring several hours into a playthrough of the game, it can be very disappointing to reach the end and just see this. On top of that, the game just doesn't attempt to be scary at all, ditching the horror tag almost entirely in favor of marketable plushies and silly voice acting. Also, complete side note, but this meme here...
Freddy, you're supposed to be on lockdown.
Officer Vanessa.
Was easily the most annoying fucking meme of 2022. Don't at me. Now, is the focus on a more kid-friendly game the definitive thing that killed the franchise? No, and honestly it wouldn't be a very big deal on its own, as FNAF was pretty notorious for having a largely child-based audience. But it's just crazy when you're comparing it to the rest of the series, seeing how much of a big step down this game is in quality compared to something made in literally Click Team Fusion with a bunch of scraps. Also, in case it wasn't obvious before, I am really not a fan of the way that Springtrap is essentially just shoehorned into the story for the sake of marketing. Yes, I know that it's not really Springtrap or whatever, but fuck you, you know what they were trying to accomplish here. With all this in mind though, it wouldn't be fair of me to not mention the Ruin DLC, which is a huge, and I mean huge, step up in quality from the base game. I think this is largely in part thanks to a more linear story and the introduction of autosave, which gets rid of all of those moments from Security Breach where you accomplish so much just to lose an hour of progress because you just barely couldn't make it to a save station. Is it the best piece of FNAF content? No. But is it a whole lot better than the rest of Security Breach?
Yes, yes, yes. Oh my god.
Now, in spite of my yapping and yammering about how FNAF became too kid-friendly, I'd argue that this isn't nearly as bad as what followed, which is...
Peter, what are you doing? Crack? What the fuck?
I'm gonna split this category into 2, starting with FNAF Analog Horror, and later we'll talk about FNAF Plus. I am almost positive that you have heard of FNAF VHS, or The Walton Files, or just other FNAF Analog Horror in general by this point. If you haven't, then please, genuinely, swap places with me. Anyways, that being said, FNAF VHS really popularized the subgenre of FNAF Analog Horror. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and start with what I really like about FNAF Analog Horror, that being the focus on body horror. While I think it was an intentional choice by Scott, I personally wish that FNAF would have just focused a little bit more on the sheer horror of being forced to remain alive inside what is essentially a big, painful metal coffin. It is an incredibly fascinating topic to me, though it's one that isn't really explored very much in the video games. It's an aspect that is much more thoroughly explored throughout fan adaptations of the story, and usually to pretty good success in my opinion. Also, the
Michael, don't leave me here!
Will forever loop in my head as how the ending of Pizza Sim went down. Though with that out of the way, I just gotta say, I personally get the feeling that I got with the Nightmare animatronics. That being that these just kind of feel like they're trying too hard to be scary. Designs are contorted with the purpose of feeling more imposing, kills are bloodier and gorier as needed, and personally, it feels more deprived of the subtleties that made the initial FNAF animatronics and story scary. That's not to say it's all bad, but where it does become a problem is when FNAF fans impose these fan creations onto the actual series, forcing disappointment onto themselves when it really just wasn't necessary. Hell, around the time that the FNAF movie came out, I remember a lot of people proclaiming just how disappointed they were with it not being very scary. However, what they were missing was the plain and simple fact that no, A PG-13 movie obviously wasn't going to be a gore fest. The only real missed opportunity in the movie for me was the spring lock failure scene, but at the end of the day, we got way more quality out of the movie than I had expected, and probably way more than we had deserved. It's also very jarring for me to see these people posting TikToks comparing Security Breach as a shit FNAF game to the older FNAF games using clips from fan-made FNAF works. The entire point of these short-form clips just feels like they're intended to give the creator and people who watch it a sense of superiority over the stinky children who are consuming the lesser FNAF games. It's just dumb and accomplishes nothing besides alienating newer fans who might be interested in it. Speaking of dumb, let's talk about FNAF Plus. While yes, this was a project that I initially put a lot of effort into keeping up with, as I believed it had great potential before it got cancelled, the one thing I have always had an issue with is the character designs. These are so comically over the top that, again, they just don't feel scary anymore. Like, look at Bonnie and tell me that bro doesn't look inbred. The rest of them don't fare much better either. Look at these four and tell me they belong anywhere within 100 feet of a child, let alone on a stage performing in front of them. It just kinda ruins it for me. That being said, it doesn't matter, the game got cancelled and everybody just played a recreation of the game, so whatever, it's fine. Now, in spite of many people's needs to point fingers either at the analog horror community or the actual current development of the mainline FNAF games as the cause of the downfall of FNAF, I'd argue that it's just a general sense of ungratefulness that is currently at fault for it. Though yes, I definitely have plenty of issues with the previously listed takes on the series, they both definitely have their own merits. And besides that, we're just incredibly lucky to have ended up with the franchise that we have today. I mean, think about it. As of the release of this video, we are a little over 2 months away from FNAF's 10th anniversary. Scott Cawthon is still involved, and we are still getting more content for the games. The movie had actual practical puppets used for the animatronics, and in another year, we will be getting yet another movie. If I were to tell this to the 9-year-old version of me who had just started his journey through the series, I think he would absolutely be pretty okay with that. But hey, you guys might feel differently, and that's perfectly okay. That being said though, thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure to check out some of my other content. I'm out of college for now, so I'll be more consistent with my uploads for the foreseeable future. Also again, we have a Discord server in the link in the description below if you're interested, and I'm pretty active in it, so check that out. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Bye bye!